Sandeep Pednekar, and you're listening to One Universe, the show based on the non-profit One Universe that promotes positivity through the promotion of love, peace, and harmony. We have a young gentleman today with us who has been putting his time and efforts into making Memphis a better place to live. So, welcome, Patrick Jeffries.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm doing great today.
So, for the benefit of our listeners, please introduce yourself.
Sure, yeah. Well, as you mentioned, I'm doing work here in Memphis.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why is because this is where I grew up. I was born in Chicago, technically, but
Okay.
since I was like 2 years old, grew up here in Memphis.
All right.
My father and his mother was a school teacher in Fraser.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, it was cool. I grew up in a part of town called Bartlett.
Okay.
And then, as I grew up, you spread your wings, went to college. I have two older sisters. They went to college as well. My middle sister didn't, but anyway. After college...
And which college did you go to?
So I went to UT Knoxville at first. And then
And what did you do there?
So when I was there, I originally started studying chemistry.
Okay.
Yeah, because my dad was a chemist, right? His mom was a teacher. He became a chemist. And then I was going to be a chemist like my dad. But then I took organic chemistry and I was like, you know what? Maybe not. Maybe this is more of a hobby. And so I switched over to psychology for my bachelor's.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then I took it a step further and I transferred out to Montana and went to University of Montana to finish. Because I kind of had this thing of you spend your whole life in one place and you're like, I need to see what else is out there.
Mm.
And college is usually that time for people, so I'm no different. It was a perfect time to grow as a person and get to know myself. And so I lived out in Montana for about 5 years, finishing up school.
Okay.
Got the bachelor's in psychology. I
Mm-hmm.
had some cool experiences out there in the Rocky Mountains. And then 2019, it was just before the whole pandemic and everything, I moved back here to Memphis.
Okay.
Because like I said, it's where my family is.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of knew who I was at that point. And now I said, I want to reconnect with the family as an adult. It's a lot different than when you're a kid knowing your family. So anyway, moved back out here. I did the whole stint where you live with your parents for a little while to
cool.
figure it out. And I was actually a waiter at Bahama Breeze for a while. And then I thought, I always had this drive ever since I was 16 of I want to help people.
Mm-hmm.
That has been really deep core part of myself from the get-go.
Okay.
And so, I was like, look, I want to do something more than just waiting tables. It was nice, but anyway, I decided to go to Memphis, University of Memphis, go back to school,
Mm-hmm.
get my graduate degree in social work.
Okay.
So that way, you can still do the whole psychology thing with social work, but you've got some extra options too. And one of the main things that I did when I started getting my degree in social work is I got back into the field. So that's when I started working for youth villages.
Okay.
And
So like an intern?
Well, I had that bachelor degree, so they let me start as a
nice. As an employee.
Yeah, a full-fledged employee.
Nice. Okay.
Now I would be an intern at other places.
Okay.
But thankfully, youth villages set me up early, so I could actually help pay my way through it. Sorry, guys, that's my dog.
That's fine.
Yeah. But anywho, yeah, I worked through youth villages while I finished up the degree, and then fast forward to this spring, I finished that degree.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And I'm, a few years strong with the company now at Youth Villages. And I switched around a little bit. I know, Sandeep, have you talked about Memphis Allies before on here? So, yeah, I worked with Memphis Allies for a little bit. A couple of years ago, Youth Villages started up that program to try and reduce the gun violence in Memphis. And as anyone from Memphis knows, that's a big topic right now.
Absolutely.
So, of course, for me, part of the reason why I went with social work is because criminal justice reform is really important to me. And so when my boss said, hey, they're starting up this program to try and end gun violence, help people out, and it's going to be in Fraser, where my grandma taught for like 20 years, I kind of saw this opportunity of like, well, maybe I'm being pushed back this direction. And so I hopped on it, and I became a case manager with them.
Okay.
I did that for a little over a year. And then just recently, over the summer here, I transferred to the residential services for youth villages.
Okay.
So that's kids who are like in the foster care system, emotionally disturbed and things of that nature. I kind of wanted to get back to the psychology side of things, I guess.
Yeah. So, how do the children that need these services, how do they get in touch with youth villages, or how does youth villages get in touch with them?
It's a good point, yeah. So with Memphis Allies, it was kind of a different beast. It was more like we went out there to try and find people who were involved in the gun violence. It was a lot more boots on the ground, right? But when you're working in a residential facility for youth, it's a lot more regimented, and there's a lot more established practices, because that's what Youth Villages was founded on, is these residential facilities.
And and how many youths are housed?
So it's kind of crazy. There's this big campus out in Bartlett, which is actually 3 separate facilities. The specific one I work at is called Bill's Place, and it's for young boys. And that one has about 170.
170 youths.
Yeah.
And what's the age limit?
And so they go for anywhere from 12 years old to 18, right? And usually what will happen is they'll get connected to us through Department of Children's Services, or connected through, let's say, another state agency, something like that, foster care system. And they kind of tie it together there.
And so the other 2 locations, do they have a different age group?
So here's the interesting thing. The other 2 locations, one of them is called Bartlett Campus. And you can imagine it kind of like summer camp style. Like they have these different cottages. Still kids who are emotionally disturbed, but they don't have to be like on a lockdown facility. They're kind of working their way out of the system. And that's boys who are teenagers as well, 12 to 18. And then the third facility is called the Rose Center. And that's for girls. That one's another kind of, they call it level 4. And that's where it's kind of like, all right, everybody stays here in the facility for the most part. Same age group, 12 to 18.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the end goal was like, hey, let's get them to a foster family or get them back with their family.
So how many, you said 174 in one location?
Yeah, that's in Bill's Place.
Bill's Place. And the other 2?
The other 2, you have similar numbers, roughly like 150 at Rose Center, and then, maybe they have, 8 cottages for Bartlett, so yeah, between 150, 200, something like that.
Okay. And so what do you think is the yearly budget for youth villages?
For all of youth villages?
Yep.
Well, if we broke down youth villages as a whole, it could be a while, but let me just give you a couple other things they do, and then I'll tell you what I think. They have the residential, they got Memphis Allies, they've got something called Life Set, which is when kids turn 18, 18 to 25, they give them a counselor in the community to help them get on their feet. And they have something called in-home services. So when these kids go out of our residential facility and back to their family, we have a team of people who help them transition back as well. And that is across, 17 different states and growing in some form or another. So their budget's got to be like 30 million,
Yeah.
Something like that, pretty big.
So how does youth villages raise $30 million? It's a non-profit, right? Is it a 501c3?
Yes.
Okay.
And actually, it's the reason why I've been with it so long is because, as you know, a lot of nonprofits are not necessarily true to their name, right? A lot of the money goes up to the admins and doesn't get to go to the actual services. But Youth Villages is one of those where the people truly care about it, whether it's the board, they have a board, they have grant writing teams. And what they'll do is they'll write grants to not only like federal legislators, but also in each state. They'll be able to work with the Department of Children's Services. And so that's where the funding will come from, is partnering with the Department of Children's Services or whatever state agency is working with these kids and like, hey, we have a kid who is in an abuse and neglect situation. What are we going to do? Or Youth Village is like, they can come stay with us. We can try and help them figure it out.
So apart from housing, there is food also, right? Food is provided.
Oh, yeah.
Breakfast,
Yeah.
lunch, dinner.
Yeah. So you can think of it like when a kid comes into Bill's place, let's say, the level 4,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're going to stay there for at least 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
So what we've got there is not only 3 meals a day, we also have staff there 24/7. They have their own courtyards where they can play basketball. We have a barber who comes there. They have an in-house barber. They've got a drumming team for therapeutic drumming. They've got a pool that we just had our last session here at Labor Day
Mm-hmm.
of the pool. It's like a whole community in itself. It really is. It's quite wild. I mean, they even have like Juneteenth celebrations and stuff like that, July 4th celebrations where they'll do cookouts for all the different courtyards with the different kids and stuff. It's
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
So 6 months is the longest that they stay there?
No, unfortunately. I mean, so there's 2 types of kids who will end up at a place like this. Either abuse and neglect
Mm-hmm.
or juvenile justice.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can imagine that until their charges are resolved, some of these kids end up staying with us for maybe a year and a half, 2 years. Our goal is to get them out of there in like 6 months.
Okay. So basically, do they come from juvenile court?
Some of them do, yeah.
Okay.
Some of them may even come from Wisconsin juvenile court.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So what is the per child expense?
What's that?
The expense that
Ooh.
youth villages has to bear per day for one child?
Yeah, that's a good question. Per child expense per day, it's tough to calculate because you got to think they have a whole staff of people there,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I would say to run a facility like that, day-to-day basis, you're looking at food, housing, employee pay. It's tough for me to put a number on it, but probably tens of thousands a year, right? I mean, hundreds a day. Just because they do try and do quality care.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I don't know, like, are you familiar with kind of residential facilities for the youth?
Yeah. Yeah. And in this case, how many are housed in a room?
So we'll have 2 in a room,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll have maybe like 18 in a courtyard.
Okay.
And essentially, we have 8 courtyards.
Okay.
So if you do the math, there's like 150, 160 roughly.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the biggest difference between youth villages and what other residential facilities do
Mhm.
is like they try to do more one-on-one care. A lot of these other facilities, I won't name names, but it feels more like a prison than like a therapeutic setting.
So when you say one-on-one, what are the services that are offered?
I'll give you an example. Like
Mhm.
me personally, I'm a
Mhm.
clinician. So I'm a licensed master of social work. So they're like, okay, cool. That means you can operate under this person who is a licensed clinical person.
Mm-hmm.
And me, I meet with this kid every week. We do an individual therapy session. I do a family session with them. I may even meet with just the parents, talk
Mhm.
to them. And then I'll meet with the caseworker.
Mhm.
So you can see how these kids have a lot of opportunity to interact and reintegrate with the family instead of just being locked in a cell or locked in a room all day,
Mhm.
right? Yeah.
So, and do they have the opportunity to go to school?
Yes, yeah, good point. Yeah, they do school every day, right? That's a
Mhm.
whole other expense. I didn't even calculate that. And they have a nursing staff,
Mm-hmm.
help with their medication management, right? Because a lot of these kids, when you're dealing with mental illness, you got to deal with medication in some form.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they have schooling, they have nursing, they have extracurriculars.
So, do you have psychiatrists on staff?
Yeah, yeah,
And and medical doctors as well?
correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Essentially, the way it breaks down is you can think of it like each courtyard would have its own doctor, right?
Okay, so even
Yeah.
you just said 18, right? 18 per courtyard.
Yeah.
So there is one doctor per 18?
Yeah, you could break it down like that.
Really?
Yeah, and you would think like, oh, that's. I mean, what do you think of that?
I think that, yeah, I mean, one doctor can handle maybe 200 patients because that patient might not be coming every single day.
Exactly. Exactly. So these doctors, we have. I think one courtyard might be an exaggeration. It would be closer to like, let's see, we have 4 doctors, so 2 courtyards per doctor.
Okay.
But even so, what was that, 36?
Mm-hmm.
That's really
Okay.
good.
And this you're talking about the medical doctor.
Yeah, yeah.
So
This
how
would be
about
the
the
medical doctor.
psychiatrist?
Now, the psychiatrist, the way this would function is it's usually like a registered nurse, right? Nurse practitioner who will do the medication and things of that nature. Psychiatrist is more of like a consultant that they operate.
Okay, so they're not housed there or they don't have an office there.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
but medical doctors have office there?
They do, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And then the big thing is, I guess I should clarify with our clinical team, like the one that I work under, they have 3 counselors per courtyard.
Okay.
And then above us, we got the clinical managers, and they call them a licensed program expert.
Okay.
The licensed program expert, that's the one with the actual license that we're operating under.
Okay.
So you can think of it that
so
way.
now what do you cater to? What needs do you fulfill with your
For
job?
me, it can be eclectic depending on the kid, but essentially the idea is to help these kids develop some ways to cope with the stressful life that they're living.
Mm-hmm.
Help these kids to sometimes we got to help the parents develop proper and appropriate parenting practices. And then you can think of it like traditional family counseling, as well as individual CBT style therapy. And then we also have a rec therapy staff. So when you have kids who are lower functioning, or maybe they're on the spectrum, anything of that nature, we kind of run the gambit. And that's why we operate under a licensed practitioner, because it's a very eclectic range of therapies that I might practice. Me personally, I think my forte is trauma and addiction treatment.
I see.
And you can imagine some of these kids deal with addiction. A lot of them deal with trauma, of course.
Why addiction at that age?
You wouldn't think it, right?
Right.
Because if you look at the statistics, like
even 18, I wouldn't. So why 12?
Yeah. Well,
and what kind of addictions are we talking about?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I'm not saying that every kid's struggling with addiction when they come in there, but let me put it this way. I did a group therapy session yesterday with 9 kids. And 9 out of the 9 kids had taken hard drugs before. They knew exactly what ecstasy, methamphetamine, heroin, all that was. And I would say at least 3 of the 9 at some point in their life could have been diagnosed with some type of substance abuse disorder.
I see.
And they're 16 kids that I work with, 16, 17.
So that's because of the environment that they grew up in.
Right, exactly. I mean, if you look at the whole population, of course, the number of kids who would have a substance addiction is incredibly small. But if you look at the number of kids in a level 4 lockdown facility, you're going to have, that's where a lot of the percentage lies. So yeah, when you break it down, that's why you got to be trained in all manner of therapies.
Okay, yeah. It's very disturbing to even know that these things happen in our community, and obviously, of course, thank you, and thank Youth Villages for what they're doing.
For sure.
So, are there also some faith-based services that are being offered?
Yeah, that's a good line of inquiry, because especially here in Memphis, you can imagine, spirituality is important. And it's an important component in people's life. Now, that's my personal belief. I'm not saying Youth Villages would espouse that. But they have a chapel there, to their credit. But I would say that's one of the areas of weakness in terms of the therapy provided. Everybody's got a weakness, every facility or every company or whatnot. Everybody. And that's where I think that we have a lot of room to grow. It's just recognizing the importance of spirituality and the will of the spirit,
Hmm.
because a lot of these kids, they've been broken down, and that may be all they can rely on is their own willpower for a while.
So if it is just mental abuse or things like that,
Yeah.
what are the kinds of trauma that they go through?
That the children go through.
Yeah.
Well, if they're in a situation where DCS is involved
Hmm.
and they've escalated to the point where they're at our facility, it could be anything from sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, running away from the home,
And this is from parents, basically.
this would be from parents. They may not even have parents, right? May even be like a grandma, grandpa. Maybe they passed away, right? And then, of course, there's the juvenile justice cases, which these kids come in because maybe they have charges. One kid that I had, he went on a joyride in a truck. He broke out of a facility in East Tennessee,
Oh boy.
stole a staff's truck because the staff had been trying to frame him for something.
Ooh.
And he stole the staff's truck, drove it all the way to Nashville, and then they caught him.
And how old was he?
He was 14 at the time,
Wow.
15 now.
Huh.
And he has a 1-year-old child. And what happened is his mother was abused by his father their whole life, and he grew up seeing that. And his mother was addicted to drugs. And so he pretty much just lived his own life. He didn't really have a parent growing up.
Mm.
And you can imagine that's what we see a lot of those kind of cases, right?
So on our show, I always talk about the US being the most advanced nation on the face of the planet.
Right.
But when you get into the grassroots, we see that it is broken in by so many problems and issues and that we have to deal with. And if and I know this is probably a small percentage of the children
Sure.
that are going through this, but if the children are the future,
Yeah.
and if that is broken, it's very disturbing. And to have entities that are providing these services to the children within our communities, it's a really good thing.
Yeah.
Obviously, you are part of it with your education and your experience that you have had in these years. I see that you have the desire to make positive changes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, that's been at the core of me. My first job was when I was 16 years old. Well, technically, my first job was at a frozen custard place. But anyway,
Okay,
that
alright.
summer, I went and worked as a YMCA counselor.
Okay, nice.
But here's the funny thing about it.
Mhm.
The whole time I was in my teen years, I was like, I do not want to work with kids. And yet here I am working with kids.
Wow.
And I think it's because I came to the conclusion that you just said. It's like, if we're going to put our energy and investment into people, I feel much more fulfilled when it's putting into children, because they are all potential.
Mhm.
All potential. Even these kids who've been through these horrible
Yeah.
things, some of them have these amazing goals and dreams. And I'm like, I really believe you could do this.
Wow.
You know?
So what is the demographics?
Well, for us here in Memphis, we get a lot of kids from Tennessee. So you can imagine it's a lot of like rural, Caucasian, a fair mix of African American too. But you don't see too many like Asian or Latino representation in terms of that. There's a fair range of intelligence. Like I said, some kids are lower functioning, some kids are normal functioning.
Mhm.
Yeah, does that kind of cover what you're asking about the demographics?
Well, yeah, I mean, a racial thing.
Yeah, the racial spread.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's mostly African American and Caucasian, just because of where we're at in the U.S., right?
Mhm.
But I do wish that there was more outreach, and I think that might be part of it. Because you got to think, Youth Villages is kind of on the back end. After all these terrible things have happened to these children, they're not really there in the community. And that's where, like, one day, I would love to have a company that is there, kind of like what I was talking about with Memphis Allies, before the children, boots on the ground, involved. Like, have you ever talked to Memphis Athletic Ministries?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, like they're here in town. They're there at the schools. You know what I mean?
Exactly,
They
yeah.
have an opportunity to talk to them before they like really make a mistake and end up in a level 4 lockdown facility.
Right.
It's tough.
So, and you brought up Memphis Allies again, because I mean that is a major problem throughout the country, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, for all the bad things that happen all over, Memphis stands at the top of each list or most of the list.
Yeah.
There is crime, there is poverty, and because there is poverty, there is crime.
Mm-hmm.
We have
Right.
tremendous break-ins in cars and houses, and whole lot of issues going on. And I have also interviewed DA Steve Mulroy, and of
Yeah.
course, I mean, and I this was about month and a half, 2 months ago, but day before yesterday, he was on TV talking about, oh, the crime rate has come down. Well,
Mm-hmm.
the crime rate has gone up, but from a different perspective, it has come down. That the bad, I mean, crime is not that bad. So there
Right.
are different ways of defining what crime is and what goes on. But overall, crime is top. It has gone up, and it
Yeah.
went up a whole lot during the pandemic. And still, there are break-ins. Even liquor stores are broken into.
I know.
So, what organizations do, and if they are taking the preventive measures to address the issues underlying in our community,
Mm-hmm.
then it is more important than offering the cure. Offering the cure is necessary because then there has been a problem. So
Sure.
there has to be a cure. So, and youth villages, as you say, is doing that, but something more has to be done to go out in the community to reach out the grassroots and see to it
Yes.
that some changes need to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the thing, Sandeep. You nailed it on the head. Is that maybe they're starting to recognize this. The people of Memphis, the leaders like Steve
Mhm.
Mulroy, our city council certainly, and is that we have to address the poverty more so than anything else.
Mhm.
What's leading people to become addicted to drugs, to turn to violence, to commit crimes is not just that they're a bunch of bad eggs who are just lawless chaos, right? It's that they never had an opportunity. It's the classic thing of like they started 3 steps back from everyone else.
Mhm.
But what you see in Memphis that is really tough to grapple with is that, like Fraser, for instance,
Mhm.
it's a very rough part of town now. It's got one of the highest crime rates in the
Mhm.
city. But when my grandma was a teacher there, it was like a lower middle class neighborhood.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you hear that story with a lot of parts of Memphis where it used to be pretty nice, but now it's just dilapidated, in ruins, potholes so big that they'll take the tire off your car.
Right.
And I think that's makes you wonder the question that comes up a lot in Memphis's history: where is all the money going then if it's not
Mhm.
back into these communities?
So what is happening, obviously, is that there's a bunch of people who have nothing better to do because they don't have jobs. What
Yeah.
are they going to do if kids are there? They think, there used to be a time when kids used to break into empty houses and make money just pulling copper wires out of the walls.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
whatever money you can get selling copper, they used to enjoy that money, and it's small. But the problem is that then that house has been broken into, and then fixing it is a problem, and it happens over and over and over again. And then the
Right.
homeowner says, you know what, I can't deal with it. Whatever happens, let it happen. And then there are empty houses, and it's a blighted neighborhood.
Yeah.
So it's a snowball effect that goes on and on. So my pet peeve has been that you need to create jobs.
Okay.
There need to be
Yeah.
big companies that need to come into Memphis that offer good jobs. So FedEx is the biggest employer, and man, it's a giant.
Right.
But the problem is that 80 to 85% of their workforce are there just to pick up the boxes at their facility.
Yes.
So which means
Right.
the income level of most of Memphis is not much high. The
Mm-hmm.
average price of a house, I mean, we have $1 million houses, but the average is $135,000,
Yeah.
which means a general we cannot, a common man cannot necessarily afford a $500,000 house, and there are tons of $500,000 houses. But
Sure.
then the problem is that we have way too many 20 or 30 or $40,000 houses.
Right.
So then the average, that's why, comes to about 135. Now it has gone up slightly because of inflation. But
Right.
if the jobs don't come, then there is always an issue. And of course, we can talk about all of these problems for
Yeah.
hours and hours together. But I definitely want to thank you for coming on our show. Thank Youth Villages, and thank you
Absolutely.
for being on my show. Thank you
Oh,
so much.
Sandeep, yeah, thank you.
Yes. And to
Appreciate
you,
it.
ladies and gentlemen, there are many issues with many cities, not only in the US, but many countries as well. The thing is that, what do you do to address those? So, the first step, of course, is to define that there are issues and what issues are there within the cities and other countries that we are talking about. Once you define those issues, then it becomes slightly easier to address those issues. But knowing what these issues are is the first step. And then how do you address those issues? Then it goes to the culture of the country, of the society, the cities, and the neighborhoods that deal with these issues and they come up with answers. And when we are talking about these issues, the idea is to come to the answer. What is a good thing, or what are the good things that can be done to make positive changes in the area that we live in? Because the area that we live in is our world, it's our universe. Hence, our show is one universe. So, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, have a great time. And when you tune into our show, know that we are going to talk about some other issue and talk about the remedies that ought to be implemented if they have already not been implemented. So, thank you so much and have a great day. Bye bye.